I gave you permission.
Okay.
You're a co-host, so you should be able to tape.
Yep, I got it.
Oh.
Don, do you want to tape it as well? You can have permission too.
No, but could you download it to my Facebook afterwards? So yeah.
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah.
What'd you think of my promo? It was half
Wonderful.
Grant and half me.
Absolutely. No. It was great. Great. I'm glad you were able to do that.
Yeah, I was like, oh, it's crunch time. But Grant and I have this theory that it's like, it has to go up within 24 hours. Otherwise, people forget and they don't pay attention to it for very long. So
throughout history, some of the greatest accomplishments have been on the spur of the moment. Look at a rocket launch. You know, you don't even know till that morning if it's a go or not. So everything comes into place.
okay.
Yeah, see, it's not allowing me to go to change the address for the YouTube. It's still on that other YouTube one. Not me. Hang on. Not me. Let me see.
Well, if it does that, the Facebook option might be the way to go.
Okay, hang on. It's giving me another chance here. Email or phone.
My head's cut off. There we go. Maybe my head got bigger. Just gotta lean back.
Stand up or sit up tall. Sit up
I
straight.
know. Well, I always move because I have 3 devices around me. So it's kind of that thing. You know, we're all interactive these days. I'm going to try to read along with the comments and see if people ask questions. So I tend to get enthralled in your answers, so I lose the comments.
Yeah, we got this problem again. We need Desta. Shoot.
We'll call her. You got 8 minutes.
Hang on. Let me see.
Is that a hard 7 o'clock or 5 o'clock?
No. It can. We do whatever, but I don't want to have you sit here and wait.
Our fans will start messaging. They'll be like, "What's wrong? Is it going up?" They're used to it. So
Yeah, another conspiracy. Yeah.
I will bet Melinda Leslie will be the first person to message me. It's not up. What's going on?
You know, I would tend to agree with that. Yeah.
She's good. She's a great
Oh,
support.
absolutely. Yeah. Such a good heart.
She also gave me a paragraph full of questions that I have to ask you during the course of this interview. So she's like, I'm sure he'll answer them on his own, but.
But are they UFO related? Because she asked me a lot of questions. But.
Right? No, they are. I hope. I'll look them up for sure.
Okay.
Oh, Grant got the bat signal. He's on the phone.
She's not answering. It's not a good sign.
Uh-oh.
She really took off.
Desta, give me a call if you're there. Thanks.
Send out the bad signal.
The bad signal. Let me try her by Facebook here.
I didn't, well, I'm not logged on like that, so.
You didn't send her an invite, right?
I did not, but I can via Facebook really quick if you want.
Let me just get her by Facebook here. I've got her.
Now in my upper left-hand corner, I have a red recording light that is flashing.
Yep. The Zoom is still recording, but we haven't gone live to anywhere yet. So this is the candid portion of our broadcast that will
tape delayed.
Exclusive. It'll be an exclusive release in 20 years.
Tape delayed broadcast 20 years from now. Yeah.
Hidden footage.
Locked away in a time capsule all that time.
In Grant's archive. I listened to you a couple times on Jimmy's show on Fade to Black. Was that last week that you were on? It was nice.
Just the other night again. Jimmy always calls me up at the last minute.
Yeah.
Or Clyde Lewis does too. His producer Ron Patton. Don, Clyde wants you on tonight to comment about something. It's like, okay. So.
It must be a radio show host thing because, yeah.
Well, Hynek used to go through the same thing all the time. WGN in Chicago would call him up a half hour and say, we're going to send a cab up. Can you be ready to go live, in an hour?
No, guest is not around. Shit. Let me see what happens if I go to Facebook. This is why you need a producer. Okay. I guess we can go on Facebook. Let's see what happens with Facebook. Okay, this is the right Facebook account. Okay, so we can go Facebook if you want, Nicole.
And in Facebook, you could always go to YouTube afterwards.
Yes. Or I was even going to say the one you have access to, is there a way, before we get into the discussion, if you can just share it to your other YouTube, like, is that possible to share the live feed?
No. Well,
Okay.
I wouldn't know how to do it. That's the thing. I've delegated all this, so I'm ignorant here.
If we go live to Facebook, just give
We're about
me
to go live. Get ready.
Well, no, there's a
5,
few.
4, 3, 2, 1. Well, just give me a few minutes and let's just talk casually, and then I'll share it across a bunch of Facebook groups, and then we'll have our audience.
Okay, we're now live on Facebook, so you're ready to go, Nicole.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good night.
Good night. Yeah.
Our
Beautiful.
guest this evening is Don Schmitt. Grant, I'll let you give an introduction. Let's find us on Facebook.
Yeah. Okay, I've known Don for quite a few years. He's one of the old timers. He's sold, 50 million books or whatever. He'll tell us exactly. He had the top selling book. He's mostly famous for Roswell. We're going to try to get some other questions in tonight. And my assistant, Nicole Sakich, is here from Illinois. I think Don is in Wisconsin. Don was with the Center for UFO Studies, worked with J. Allen Hynek, is famous mostly for the Roswell story. Has done a lot of work and is still with the Roswell Museum. And he's one of the big timers of ufology, one of the more famous people in the field. So I'm happy to welcome Don Schmitt to talk with us this evening. Good evening, Don.
Well, good evening, Grant. Good evening, Nicole. It's my pleasure to be with both of you this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, you got your tie and your stuff on. I should have, if I'd known, I would have. You're always so well dressed, and you look very professional tonight.
Well, it's something that Dr. Hynek often reminded us, that we're walking on eggshells as it is. So at least always present a first good impression. So.
Wow, there you go. So how long did you work with Hynek?
8 years. In fact, for the 8 last years of his life. And so wonderful experiences. In fact, we're seriously talking about doing another book on Hynek, because from our own personal perspective, I love the fact that with J. Allen Hynek, everything was on the table, that you could sit with him casually at his home. And there could either be just the two of us or a room full of people. And he would, now, George, what do you think about this? And Mark, what do you think about that? And Don, tell me your feelings about this. And nothing was wrong as far as anyone's personal opinion. It was just throw it out there and let's see if we can. And Hynek was one who, and I'm afraid a lot of science has become, scientific consensus. And I'm sorry, there's nothing scientific about that. Just because the vast majority of scientists might believe something doesn't necessarily ever make it close to the truth. So we still have to, come up with a final resolution regarding UFOs. And that's one of the reasons that Hynek just loved to explore every possible, answer, with the hope that, any one of them might finally suffice, might finally, become, that reality that we all would be in the final chase and at the finish line when the answers finally come.
were you in Chicago when the files were there? Were you operating out of those? Because I went to see the files one time.
Yes.
And so you were operating out of there. And a related question, then I'll hand it off to Nicole for a question. There's always this story that the files, what happened to the files that he had when he went to Phoenix? So you had the files at the center, but then he had some files. Right. There was these stories that the files had, somebody had grabbed the files or something. What happened there? What was the real story?
Well, part of the problem when Alan, Dr. Hynek, and his wife Mimi moved to Scottsdale, just outside of Phoenix.
Yeah.
It was with the enticement that there was going to be research funding, that there was some entrepreneur in California that was going to put up an actual grant to create a facility. And here was Hynek in what he knew was the winter of his life. And he still wanted to make his mark. It was one of the things when Alan had established the Center for UFO Studies in the fall of 1973. He had made the mistake that he, at a press conference, he had promised the room full of reporters that within 1 year, he was going to come up with a solution. He was going to come up with an answer as to, what was behind the phenomenon. And here it was 10 years later, and he was still struggling and still spinning his wheels, as we all were, trying to come up with a foundation, a basis for any one solution. And I'll never forget the last time I had dinner with Alan, he said to me, Don, he pounded his fist on the table and he went, Don, it's smacking more and more of nuts and bolts. And as a foremost astronomer, that was his greatest difficulty in accepting the vast distances in time and space. And how is an actual spaceship travel from point A to point B, traverse all of that distance. And so here he had an opportunity with some actual funding. And it was one of the things that Alan, like a politician, that he felt he was spending too much time soliciting money, funding as far as his continuing research. And so that was afforded him they dangled the carrot, but it never happened. But nonetheless, he had moved a lot of his personal files to Arizona. And as you mentioned, Grant, and quite tragically, those files are gone now. We lost a good portion of them. In fact, even after Alan passed away, Dr. Mark Rodiger, our scientific director at that time, and Mark Chesney, who had worked with NASA, who was also on our board of directors, he was an engineer at Johnson's Control down in Houston. They went out to Arizona to retrieve as much of the files as they still could. And we know that there's still, a good portion of his personal material that we'll never see again.
Wow.
That makes me sad. Do you think it's like spirited away somewhere, or is it just truly gone? It's gone for good, well, or do you think it'll turn up as, time passes and hopefully we'll have an archive?
I think they're gone.
Yeah.
And I say that for the same reason, and Grant certainly remembers APRO, the Area Phenomena Research Organization. And CUFOS, and I was in the office at the time that the then co-director of APRO, Jim Lorenzen, was becoming very concerned as to the future status of the APRO files. And he had actually called up J. Allen Hynek in Chicago. I was in the office, and he pleaded with Hynek that they were concerned of a possible coup, that insiders within APRO were going to push them out, take over the organization, and they would no longer have control, and especially of all the accumulated APRO files, which was the oldest UFO organization, civilian group in the world at that time, since 1952.
Right.
And Hynek had agreed that we would do that provided we could rename APRO CUFOS West, the Center for UFO Studies West. And that's where Jim Lorenzen did not concede. He backed away and said, no, my wife Coral will never agree to that. And so the very same people that are now in control of the APRO files are also in control of much of Hynek's personal files. And here it's been, now we're approaching 35 years. And both are still in the same hands, the same people. And there's been a lot of money that has been offered for this material. And I think it's strictly to prevent them from public, as far as scrutiny, from accessibility, to keep the researchers out. And that's the tragedy, the crime of all this, that it's as though they couldn't keep us from furthering as far as our own research, but they could prevent us from having access to Hynek's files as well as the APRO files in that respect.
Which there's two interesting things I find with this portion of conversation. I know in the past, or not in the past, currently we talk about this era of not sharing research with each other, and MUFON often comes up with this, that their database is still private or it's been bought by certain people in the past. But if I understand my evolution of APRO to a point, they kind of evolved into MUFON, or MUFON kind of maybe poached some of these cases and evidence, like you're talking, and poached is a harsh word.
Well, but there was quite a controversy at the time, considering that the founder of MUFON, the late Walt Andrus, was originally with APRO.
Yeah.
And as he was siphoning away cases, it became more and more evident that he was establishing his own database.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he announced, and I believe it was originally called the Midwest UFO Organization.
Now they've sort of established this secrecy or non-transparency with their findings and their data, though. I mean, do you think that is a theme that still carries over now? And how do you think we can change that? Because obviously we need more eyes on this type of research.
I could not agree more. And you are correct, Nicole, that there almost is as though it's territorial. In fact, Hynek often would rely on MUFON investigators. In some of the more remote areas, a case would come in and he would gladly, accept that a MUFON investigator would, screen out the information, and if it warranted, higher level scrutiny on his part. And what was amazing, though, how often we would be assigned to a case by Hynek, and we would talk to some witnesses, and then we would get a phone call from one of the witnesses a week later, and what's this other group? They claim they're with some other group, and we shouldn't talk to you people, we should only talk to them. And we would find out later these were, local, and I say it, in jest, but, MUFON wannabes, because Hynek would often refer to them as little old ladies in tennis shoes, as he would call them, because, they would flash their MUFON membership, decoding ring, that type of thing. And, but the idea that they would actually tell people, well, now don't talk to any other investigators. You only want to talk to us. And that just smacks of just total amateurism. And I'm sorry, I have no time. I never did. And it's a case of, we're all in this race together. I've often stated that if any one of us succeed, we all win. What's the point of ever censoring? What's the point of ever hoarding information that others, may have additional corroboration, verification of, if only it would see the light of day? So again, it just smacks of almost a clubhouse mentality, and little old ladies in tennis shoes. I'm sorry, and no disrespect to little old ladies, believe me.
Hey, yeah, they're pretty persistent sometimes.
Yes,
but,
yes.
Don, I will say this is a theme we see in the community right now. It's a current theme. There is this cry for transparency, but also there is this cry for collaboration and working well with others and supporting each other in this field, despite our little rabbit holes that we like to fall into and that we dig into. And I know that's often a fine line with how researchers treat each other in this field. We were discussing this on Spaced Out Radio last week, I believe. We had an all women's panel, and we discussed that often. Well, you can catch it. The archives are free and it's all over Facebook.
No, I mean as a guest. So I'm sorry.
Next time. Dave, I'm sure would love to have you on SOR anytime. But this theme came up where, you know, it's like your research isn't as good as my research. It might be too woo. And I would like you to comment, because I was into strictly nuts and bolts for so long in my own research. And it often comes up where you pit yourself against your own experiences that you've had. And I'm an experiencer as well.
Right.
And there's this theme of nuts and bolts research or woo research, and we often try our own research to figure out things for ourselves. And I know you, amongst other people that I respect in this field,
thank you,
are not a UFO witness or an experiencer.
That's correct.
And that I enjoy, because it does give you a level of skepticism, and you don't have, I think of it as an advantage. You don't have the advantage of saying, I know what I saw. So how do you help combine both of those worlds of research? Because you are rather good at it. You don't paint yourself in a corner of, oh, I can't go there because there's nothing scientific to solidly stand on. So.
Oh, but as Grant knows, I have painted myself in corners at times, but only because it was the only corner in the room.
Right.
And one has to, you know, go after and examine every possible explanation. And that was something that Hynek caught up in that if you truly, for example, whenever someone is introduced as an expert on UFOs, well, how is that possible? How can you be an expert on something that remains a mystery, something that remains unidentified? You can be an expert on the cases, you can be an expert on the history, you can be an expert investigator, but even there, you're still basically chasing phantoms.
Right.
You don't know what may finally turn and stare you in the eye, and as a result, you still have to be, and I would like to say, courageous enough to look under or open every door.
Mm-hmm.
To be so totally myopic, as even so many scientists, that you have a preconceived theory that, well, I believe UFOs are this, and then you denounce and you dismiss everything else because you are transfixed on, well, UFOs are only psychic phenomena, or they're only, you know, as far as projections, holographic projections from another dimension, that type of thing. Well, then again, you're shutting out so many other good possible cases that provide provide material that all would lend themselves, you know, towards a final resolution. And that's why Roswell, specifically because it encompasses every aspect of the phenomenon. Just about every other UFO case is a fleeting event. Somebody sees something in a nighttime sky. Occasionally you see something daytime. It may be a close encounter. It may be a second kind, a landing. It may be a third kind, an occupant sighting. But there it is, and there it goes. You know, seldom, if ever, is it something you can take into a laboratory. But with Roswell, you have everything. You just hundreds of witnesses, both military and civilian. You have multiple bases involved. You have a transference of actual physical records. You have a recovery operation involving physical wreckage and remains. So you also have bodies involved. And so you then have a potential of tons of photographs and film that are off hidden someplace aside from the actual physical evidence. And so every and any time you have someone who says, I may have a photograph, or I know where there may be some physical evidence. I can't tell both of you how often we have had false alarms in Army footlockers and down behind retaining walls, down in basements and under crawl spaces and behind fireplace brick, and as far as in water heater tanks and out below and beneath patio concrete slabs. And what do? That one time you just poo-pooed, you laugh it off, may have been, you know, the golden goose, may have been the pot of gold. So you check everyone. And again, many times you do wind up, you know, with a little egg on your face. You do paint yourself in a corner, and only because you rely on witnesses, you rely on experts to come up with conclusive analyses, determinations, and then that's where you draw your own conclusions. It's not a case of wherever Don Schmitt claims this or Don Schmitt says it's this or it's that. No. It's always been, and I love the fact, I think smart people have always surrounded themselves with smart people. That you have people that you can rely on that push the buttons, know which buttons to push, know where to go for the answers, and you place great faith in these people. So you still should be a gentleman and a good enough researcher that even when they slip up, you still accept responsibility because you gave it to them in the first place. You placed them in that room, in that corner. And then as a result, if it fails, you should still accept responsibility. And no one can ever accuse me of passing the buck. Whenever we have been wrong about something, it's been my fault. And you just move on. You go on to the next lead, the next possible breakthrough information, because you keep moving forward. You can't become so transfixed on a preconceived theory that it's the only one you will ever entertain. And to me, that is totally faulty science.
I agree with you there. And I think, you know, when research is stagnant, you know, that's when you're in trouble. If you're not coming up with new ideas and a new perspective on how to tackle some of these problems and issues in the field, then you're really not doing your job.
Correct.
And I know the best of, well, I'll say the best of us, but I mean the best of you guys that have been doing this decade upon decade upon decade. You know, you do sit back and you look at your anthology of work and you notice the evolution of your work and how you tackle these issues and how they've been in the popular climate as well as just our exclusive community here. And what would you say has most changed from now to then in your way of thinking about the phenomenon?
To me, it personally, it's become much more melancholic in that when I think back when we first started the investigation, and it was one of the things that Hynek, you know, personally loved. There was a period where our chief investigator, Alan Hendry, had moved to Arizona and became a tech writer for Hughes Aircraft. And then Dr. Hynek found himself more and more sitting at a desk. He was, you know, serving as the editor of the International UFO Reporter, which was our monthly magazine at that time. And he just hated it. He longed to be out in the field. He just loved, whether it was Papua New Guinea or Hisdalen, or as far as down in the Amazon of Brazil, or even up as far as in some of the mountains of, you know, Helena, as far as state of Washington, that type of thing. That he loved to make things happen. He loved to be there at Socorro, New Mexico, for example, within hours after it happened, because you were then in control of your own destiny. You were there to make decisions. You were there to control the very nature of the investigation. And then at the end of his life, when he was able to go out to the Hudson Valley, the boomerang sightings in the early 80s, out through New York and Connecticut. And some of us on the board at UFOs at that time, we used to joke that Alan's back in his, element, that he once again is able to play cowboys and Indians. And we meant that in all due respect, because, again, you're getting your hands dirty. You're actually out sifting through, as he would say, separating the wheat from the chaff. And it's no different than we've led now 5 archaeological digs at the Roswell crash site. And I love the way History Channel on Ancient Aliens, the other night, oh, Don was just a participant in one of the digs. No, I led all 5 of them. Please, yet you go out of your way to always reduce our involvement. Like we're the Johnny-come-latelys. No, I'm sorry. We've always tried to be in the forefront. And so I take personal umbrage in that. And again, I learned that from Hynek. Don't be afraid to be actually out on the battlefield, to be in the trenches, because you may not come back, figuratively, but nonetheless, you're the one who was still reporting back from the front lines.
Yes.
You're not just, oh, I read a report, or I read so-and-so's book.
I think that's what we all kind of live for when we're in this community. I know I do, whether it's assisting on some local investigations going on, or like with my own sighting a few months ago, just being able to actively participate in an experience,
True.
Even if it's following up to somebody else's witness,
But I think
it is amazing. And that's what I try to tell people, that ufology and, working in this community can be so rewarding because it is interactive. If you get out there, if you get,
absolutely,
what do you call it? Armchair research?
Armchair or keyboard investigation. And when I think of, with Hynek, how often we would be in the field with witnesses, recreating an experience. 1:30 in the morning, we would be out in the middle of nowhere and having the people relive what they had experienced just days before, and then observing their behavior, how they would become emotional and even frightened, which would speak volumes for the fact that they were very anxious. They were, actually frightened to be back, as we would say, at the scene of the crime. And nothing develops, and shapes an investigation more than returning back to the scene of the crime.
Right.
And getting back to Roswell quickly and talking about the sadness of every time I go back to New Mexico, it becomes a little more lonely because everybody's gone now. When I think back over the last 30, 25, 20 years, and when so many of the principal firsthand witnesses were there, and they didn't come forward, they didn't call and raise their hand and, oh, you never called me, or you forgot. No, we would have to track them down, one lead to another, and this is before the internet, and we had to, use hackers with the Veterans Administration. We did credit checks on people. We went through air certification. We claimed that we were compiling lists for base squadron reunions, all under the pretext that, well, we just are trying to find these people. And we were very successful at it, but it was time consuming, but nonetheless, we found hundreds of them. And the saddest aspect of that right now is they are all gone. Mm. And how many of them we found a year after they passed away, months after they passed away. There was on one occasion where we called, and it was the wife who picked up the phone, and she was just returning from the funeral.
Terrible.
And the level of frustration, because it hits you like no other experience in your life, that whatever information they possessed, whatever they knew, it's gone forever. You missed it by a day, a month, a year, gone forever. And I defy any other investigators to be able to speak as far as to that level of frustration on a regular basis, Because again, Roswell involves so many witnesses, and as a result, we have had the good fortune of speaking to so many of these people, providing them with an opportunity to go on the record and how their stories, you know, all corroborate one another. Absolutely unbelievable, absolutely fantastic.
Well, I think that is also important to note with research today, which is something I also tell experiencers often in different groups that I'm in. It's also important for us to document and keep notes of what we experience, because there is such a shortage of true research, of true field work and follow-up. Maybe not just an initial interview, but true follow-up, you know, keeping tabs on people over the decades to see how these events unfold for them or unfold publicly with any kind of work being done.
Mm-hmm, of course.
And that's what you really just don't see. And I don't think because there's a lack of want, I think it's people don't realize that that's their call to action. You know, I'll pull from Kennedy a little bit here, you know, and his famous speech, you know, ask not what ufology can do for you, but what you can do for ufology. You have to get out there. It's
and make
great.
things happen. Make things happen.
You do.
Too many sit and wait for the phone to ring, and it won't ring.
And it won't at all. And you have to be active by reporting what you're going through if you have a sighting or if there's high strangeness involved. And you also have to be active in following up with the people that you do report to, or at least documenting your own, you know, experiences the best you can. And that might just be keeping a journal or a calendar. It's very simple, but a lot of people just don't realize that you can help your own case as much as possible by doing the simplest of things, or by seeking out people that want to help you. They are kind of out there privately too, but and the best are always local.
Well, let's use the example of Project Blue Book, which was declassified in 1977 during the Carter administration. And you have 13,000 cases, 701 that remained unexplained.
Mm-hmm.
How many ufologists have gone and made any attempt to reinvestigate any of those 701? The fact that the Air Force, that Project Blue Book, and Hynek was the chief scientific consultant on the project, and he would be the first to admit that they never really investigated any of those cases.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that we all know, and Grant certainly knows this, that Blue Book was nothing more than a PR front for the actual investigation. But the point being that because there was such a cursory investigation, that wouldn't it be great, and as certainly as demonstrated with Roswell, that for lack of current activity, you'd go back, track down the original witnesses if they're still alive, and I think you would find out that there's still a wealth of material that could still be looked into. And that you would find that a particular case that the Air Force had just summarily dismissed now would come forward and become a more substantive, more solid, UFO occurrence. And so we all have these events that have happened in our backyards. So it's just a matter of, again, get out and make things happen. Because as I've mentioned, that after the witnesses are gone, it's too late. Nothing more that can be done short of the government, short of the military releasing files, releasing documents and saying, well, we've covered this up these past 50 years, but here's what actually happened. Not going to happen anytime soon. So we have to do that. And so anytime I hear a ufologist or a researcher say, hey, I'm not getting any phone calls, I'm not getting any reports, again, they're there. Even go to the public library and pull out, the microfiche, the microfiche.
I love doing that.
All the old cases. Again, your backyard, and you'll find the people are still there. You'll find police reports. You'll find military cases. You'll find, just a wealth of material if you go and look for it. So,
well, and not to completely diss this younger generation, that I feel like I have a foot in each, and this young millennials and maybe a boomer generation here with how I research. There are advantages to digging around online, or like Grant says, following the boards. And it led me to a comment that you had made on Facebook that I thought was rather interesting. I think it was back in June. And the topic was abductions, and the discussion of Travis Walton came up. And I believe your comment was, I've spoken with Travis. It's not really abductions.
Right.
We'll see who understands. And nobody really commented back. I did. I was like, I think I know.
I remember. Yes, yeah, because
But would you please elaborate on that and maybe tell us your evolution of thinking when it comes to abductions?
Well, and it's just singling out the Walton case as a separate incident, that it had nothing to do with what we have come to know as missing time / abduction reports. These cases where people, whether through regression, hypnotic regression, or through even total recall of the event, would claim that they have been physically taken on board a craft, subjected to some form of physical examination, and then return to their car, their home, what have you, that type of thing. And any student, anybody who knows anything of the Walton case, it never smacked of an actual abduction situation. And for someone who has actually been to the very location, the very site of where it transpired, to have been there with Travis and to see, for example, the original 2-track road where his crew had finished for the day, November 5th of 1975, and coming down aside from that mountain, and then seeing that craft, and then seeing that valley where that object, ascended and then started to pass in their direction, stopping the truck and Travis racing out and getting basically too close to the object, being zapped by that blue beam of light, and to see his description of being flung backwards about 30 feet and slammed against those boulders, those rocks that are still there. And then thinking, my God, how could he possibly have even survived that alone? I mean, he would have been fatally injured just from that experience in itself. And so I would always talk to Travis, and we'd always sit, and he never, would argue with me. He would always be the reason that he himself, he accepted the label of, being an abductee, but he was never comfortable with it. And as we know in the movie Fire in the Sky, he was always extremely, apprehensive to support the movie, because that entire abduction scenario, as dramatized in the movie, had nothing to do, had no basis in fact of the actual Travis Walton description, whether it was through his personal recall. And when you think about it, for having been missing for 5 full days, that even regression brought nothing else forward. There was nothing else there. There was this mental block, but even the mental block, I would argue with Travis, because maybe, Travis, you weren't really with us. You were unconscious. You were possibly dead. And I would use the term that they took the paddles to you. They brought you back. They didn't abduct you. They accidentally, fatally injured you. They took you on board, and the next thing you're lying on this table and you wake up, and they kept you until it was safe to return you back, and not to where you were originally picked up, the top of that mountain, where he would have frozen to death if they just would have deposited him back where this originally happened. But they dropped him off down in Heber, down at the foothills of the Snowflake Mountains, across from three payphones, three phone booths, where he could call for help, where he could call his brother and they could come and pick him up, having no idea that he had been missing for 5 full days. So that's where, and this has been going on for a number of years now, and that's why I'm very proud of Travis in that he now, and that's why he's much more outspoken, and that's why he's been able to go back to the site with even a level of almost feeling that he's been given another chance, that they brought him back, that they revived him.
I just watched a newer documentary on Amazon Prime, I believe, about Travis Walton's experience, and it's a far cry to hear him speak about everything. And I know you know Travis. Everybody talks about how overly kind this man is and how honest he, appears to be and trustworthy. And so to hear him speak on that level and to separate it from the Hollywood entertainment version of Fire in the Sky, that's, I talk to a lot of people in and outside of ufology. It seems like the more I do shows like this or interview people outside of ufology come and talk to me about this world, and that's one of the first things they bring up is, oh my God, it's so terrifying, Fire in the Sky, I saw it in theaters, and and
just even a little background on even Fire in the Sky. When Paramount had hired a screenwriter, Peabody Award-winning screenwriter Tracy Torme, who I've known longer than most people in the field. And Paramount had contacted me to put out a statement on the movie's behalf, to attend the premiere, and to be part of a press conference endorsing the movie. Mm-hmm. And Tracy immediately calls me up and he goes, Don, stay away from it. Don't get involved, because, as he put it, they have totally bastardized my script. Mm-hmm. That Tracy, who had just come off writing the CBS miniseries, Intruders, mm-hmm. which was based on the late Bud Hopkins book, Intruders.
Yep.
And Paramount felt that to justify the film being a feature presentation, to put it on a big screen juxtaposed to, just another made for TV movie, that they had to raise the sensationalism of this missing time. And that's where they totally fictionized the abduction. They created an abduction sequence that Travis, to this day, has never recounted. He has never endorsed, much to his credit. And that's where I will stand with him 100%, that his story has not deviated. He is still trying to get Hollywood to do a remake, to present it as it actually happened. But the fact that Paramount, quite simply, to just sensationalize it, to make it feature film worthy, that was the only reason that they created that abduction sequence. Because, again, I tell all your viewers that it had nothing to do with Travis's actual experience.
Well, I'm very interested and was excited to hear you say that, because part of my research has been this journey of and Grant, I would like you to speak about it, because it kind of led me to your work and things that interest your pursuits. And it is this correlation between near-death experiences or the afterlife and the abduction scenario. And Grant is one of the only researchers out there that is making these comparisons, but experiencers have been making these comparisons for years and years in their groups when they discuss these things. So Grant, do you have any comments on what he said about Travis's experience and abductions? I know we discuss no abductions a lot.
Travis has picked that up. He has, now he talks about the fact that he may have been dead. The question I wanted to ask Don, sort of related, because how much abduction stuff did the center do? Because I know there's another famous case that you were involved with, a case that I'm very interested in, and that's the Sherry Wild case.
Yes, yes.
And you brought in this top researcher. One of the things I'd like you to comment on her case, what you can talk about her case, but the thing that when she brought the regressionist in, when I talked to her, she said the thing that fascinated her the most was when the regressionist takes her back to the event on the road where they stopped the car.
Yes.
He says, what time is it? She says, I didn't look at my watch. And he said, well, look at your watch.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said she looked at her watch and went, oh, it's like 10 after 10 or whatever it was.
Right,
and the other thing was when they asked her what the street sign was. And apparently this is a top researcher guy that did the regression stuff. And she talked about this fact that she was basically going back to the experience, because you talked about time and space before. And I remember when she talked about that, it was pretty weird that she was basically saying, I went back and sort of relived the experience, but there was different events taking place. That I was looking at the street sign when I first did look at the street sign, I was looking at my watch and stuff like that. So in terms of the regression, how much work did the center do? And can you talk a bit about the Sherry Wild case? Because I think they're doing a movie on her now. It's kind of a very prominent case.
And the fact that it wasn't so much even the center as it was Dr. Hynek. As we know that Hynek was involved in '73 with the Pascagoula case with both Hickson and Parker. And then he was certainly involved as far as with Travis's case in '75.
Yeah.
So Hynek, I mean, there again, he was not afraid to get, and especially at that time, in areas which were considered very fringe, very extreme at that time. No different than Hynek in the late '70s was becoming more and more intrigued with crash retrieval cases as originally proposed by the late Len Stringfield. But getting back to Sherry's case, we worked with the late Stanley Mitchell, who had his office on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And I was referred to him by Dr. Hynek. I was the only other researcher at UFOs that Hynek referred was the society. Okay. He had developed battlefield hypnosis during the Korean War, where they were doing surgeries, amputations on the battlefield with nothing more than hypnosis. You can imagine that. I mean, I watched video footage of patients undergoing open heart surgery, talking to the doctors during, the surgery in nothing more than a hypnotic trance. And he worked with law enforcement throughout the country where a witness would only recall a fleeing vehicle, and then under Stan Mitchell's regression would not only remember the color, but also the make and then the license number. So Mitchell always demonstrated that what the eyes didn't see, the brain did. And that was the same techniques that through him we applied with abduction cases. And Sherry Wild was a wonderful example of where, because we couldn't get her, and as you know, Grant, it was a broad daylight. It was a Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. She was to rendezvous with a girlfriend at that time to go into Madison, Wisconsin, to go shopping at the local mall. And she wouldn't arrive till afternoon. Her girlfriend had changed back to her house, clothes, giving up on her. And it's like, well, I'm on time. What's the problem? And then she was shocked to see it was 2 hours later. And so this was something that then through this whole chain of events, which then involved her husband and then later her own 2 daughters, and realizing 10 years later that something much more had happened. And then through the regression, and as she thought was a work crew up ahead on this hillside, which was rather unusual on a Sunday, that there would be a work crew, you know, working both sides of the road. And when she was asked, well, did you see vehicles? Well, no, there were no trucks, there were no cars, but yet there they were all working. And then as she proceeded and then talking, they were all dressed the same way, and they were all very short. And then as she kept talking about, and then when one of them turned and I see the eyes, and I kept trying to flee. I kept trying to get away. And Mitchell couldn't get her beyond that point. And then he thought, well, let's ask, do you see a street sign? Do you look at your watch? And then she is able to give the actual street, as you mentioned, Grant. And then she says, and I put down the clutch. She was driving a Volkswagen Bug, a Beetle, stick. And then we knew we had her for the first time. She was beyond that block.
Yeah.
And then she described, you know, the entire situation. Wonderful case. And the fact that there is a screenplay being developed as far as a movie. I love the fact that Mitchell was able to bring out as much as he did, and mainly because he allowed her to speak freely. He asked no leading questions, just what do you see now? What are you experiencing now? And he was open. We were using a technique that Dr. Richard Haynes had developed. It was a 3-stage regression where you first take the party back to the actual occurrence, and you have them relive it, first person, in all of its terror and all of its fear. You just want the emotion to present itself as high as it originally was at the very time of the occurrence. And then you bring them out, and then you take them back down. And the second time, they're now just an observer. Mm-hmm. They are seeing it as an observer, and they have even a curtain in front of them if they ever need to quickly close the curtain because they can't watch anymore. And then to peek through, and then, oh, now what do you see? Now what is happening? So you provide them a security blanket. And then the third time you take them back, and this time, and now what are you thinking? What are your thoughts to what is happening now? It was wonderful. I think it's one of the reasons that it allowed Sherry to come out with as much information as she did. And it's a tragic case in that it also estranged her from her husband, her daughters, and it's an ongoing situation. Even it started to involve her 2 daughters as well as her grandson, who was describing experiences from his bedroom. You know, the little men standing at the foot of his bed when he was 5 years old. So it needs to be a movie, and believe me, and as you know, Grant, they will not have to sensationalize any of her story. It's just a wonderful, wonderful, you know, I won't say experience, but it needs to be told because I'm sure there are many other Sherrys out there who need her bravery, her courage to lead them out from the shadows and also get the help that they may need.
What did Mitchell think of this? He was a top guy. Did he work with other clients?
And skeptical. But he was convinced it was an actual experience.
But for a guy that has never probably done a UFO case, was he kind of shocked at realizing this may have been for real?
When she was reliving the experience in the first hand, and when she described, for example, being inside the craft and how cold it was, and she immediately broke out in goosebumps. Yeah. And she was shaking. And whatever she described, her body physiologically reacted to it as well. And Mitchell was going, my God, Don, I never saw that before, because her very, you know, her very demeanor, her very, you know, body physiologically was reacting to what she was reliving, what she was describing. Mitchell, for example, he would go out to New York, and on occasion he would work with Broadway stars where if they needed to, for example, cry on cue, that he would be able to provide them with a particular word that would spark emotion, that within the dialogue, the script within the performance, that they would hear that word and they would immediately start crying. Well, she had been given no hypnotic suggestion and what to react to. This was all spontaneous. This was all as though she were actually reliving it as it transpired. And Mitchell was profoundly affected. It was one of the reasons that, also much to his credit, he worked with her. We did another series of regression with Sherry, and it was all pro bono. It was all, as far as at no charge to Sherry and even others that we worked with thereafter, because he too was becoming more and more intrigued that he was on the forefront of something truly, profound, something truly amazing, fantastic, as the human experience would describe it.
She spoke very highly of you, that you sort of like rescued her, that nobody was dealing with it and stuff like that, and that you stepped in. You spent a lot of time with her, correct, over the years trying to bring her through this thing?
I did, and I like to believe I've always been there for her. I've often advised her who to stay away from, especially when it came to amateurs who were planting other imagery and things. And I would always, now Sherry, I need you to step back. It was no different than, now Sherry, please don't read anything on the subject. Don't discuss. For example, in between the sessions with Stanley Mitchell, I don't want you talking to anybody. I don't want you discussing this even with family members. I want this to remain as pristine as possible, because granted, as you know, we have colleagues that have regressed people dozens of times, and each regression feeding on the previous until they, get that information that they're looking for. And one of the things that Sherry, leading up to that first day with Mitchell, she kept saying, I'm so concerned that there's nothing there, that we're going to find nothing. And it's like, Sherry, please, we will be just as happy for you to come away knowing that you can move on with your life. You can accept the fact that nothing more happened than possibly, for whatever reason, you had some other, experience, fugue state, or you momentarily fell asleep, you were daydreaming, what have you, anything but that you can, get on with your life and still being open to something much more. So we constantly assured her, don't provide anything that you feel we desire, that we need, that we're looking for. That's not what we're there for. We're there solely to provide you with some professional help that will enable you to, move forward, deal with this in your life, and then take appropriate actions as to, how to further treat, such an experience, and also be there to protect you in the event of ridicule. Sherry is still, to this day, and she works in real estate, the moment even potential customers hear of who she really is, it's like, come on, people, come out of the dark ages. Yeah. Please, you're living back in the 50s and 60s, Air Force involvement. Get your heads out of the sand. If you still think this is a nonsense, a topic, a taboo topic, you're, demonstrating more of your own, blindness than Sherry is. And that Sherry's been brave enough to step forward. And you would agree, Grant, she needs to be applauded for this.
Absolutely. She's gone through a lot of pain, especially when you give up your family the way she did.
And physical pain. And physical pain, as you know, Grant. Yeah. I mean, she has had, and she still is having a lot of problems as far as with her personal health, and much of it related to at least what has happened during all those years. So, and hardly the type of thing you would wish on anybody.
Exactly. I want to ask you, I'll give it back to Nicole. I want to ask you two, because we skipped over Roswell. I had two sort of small questions on Roswell. The one you had already answered, and that was that basically it's over. Like all the witnesses are dead. But the two aspects that interested me on the Roswell case, and I wonder if you could just sort of bring me up to date on what the latest is. One was the live alien story, and the other was the metal research being done at Wright-Patterson. You guys worked on both those. Can you sort of elaborate what's the latest on that?
The survivor at Roswell was something that initially we only had family testimony to, secondhand. Whether it was the sheriff of Chavez County in Roswell at that time, or even the firefighters who got out to the site before the military came in. And then more and more we were getting testimony from people who worked at the hospital, the base hospital, and then we were actually getting testimony from former military, deathbed confessions. And then eventually we secured firsthand testimony that yes, indeed, there was a survivor. And then we tied that into the testimony, the deathbed testimony of Black Mac, Marion Magruder, who was a colonel who was part of the War College, class of 47-48. And he was assigned to Wright-Patterson in April of 1948. They were brought in as the War College. They were shown actual material, debris from the Roswell incident from just a year before. And they were taken to another room as he testified to 5 of his sons, independent of one another, just months and weeks before he died, 1995, as I recall. And then he described the survivor. He described in April of 48 that they were presented as far as an opportunity to actually see the survivor from Roswell, and that it appeared very sad, as though it was being treated as a guinea pig, as though it was more of a prisoner than anything else. That it was the way we will even treat, a captured animal, a new species of sort. And in fact, his heart went out to it. He felt as though that as a higher intelligence, that we were hardly, serving it and learning from it in any capacity, that we were holding it hostage. And so it demonstrated that level of arrogance that then transponds as far as even the whole element of that we feel like Will Smith in an independent state, that we could just crawl in the cockpit, sit down and just fly, this recovered alien craft. And I maintain it's part of the same human arrogance that after all this time, it's still a cover-up of ignorance, that we still can't, cross this barrier of the technology, that it is still so far beyond our own technology that we can't get beyond, that transference of information, whether it's with a survivor or whether it's with the actual hardware. We can't find the on button. And for those who claim that we're flying a fleet of flying saucers as we speak, to me, that's part of that human arrogance. I see no evidence of that, and I find it more of a cover-up of ignorance after all this time.
I'm glad you said that, because I've been saying the same thing, looking at the highest level people I could, and you talked to a lot of high level people that were there, and so talk about the metal, and then before I throw back to Nicole, Whitley wrote the book on Majestic, where Jesse Marcel Jr. was brought into the sub-basement of the Capitol, and Dick D'Amato said, this is for real. Yes. Did you ever deal with General Exxon, and did you ever deal with D'Amato? Did D'Amato come to you about the Area 51 thing when he was running around trying to figure out what's going on? And talk about the metal and this behind-the-scenes stuff with the General and with Dick D'Amato.
Well, first of all, as far as the metal, because that was part of your previous question, all of the witnesses, that's one of the things that anyone, whether it's Annie Jacobson with Area 51 or, those who espouse that This was even German technology, as Tom DeLonge does, as far as in conjunction with the aliens, that type of thing. You know, the Nazis that escaped down to South America, and they somehow collaborated as far as in coming up with the device that crashed in New Mexico in '47, that type of thing. They never addressed the wreckage, the almost nearly indestructible wreckage that was recovered, that you couldn't cut it, you couldn't burn it, that even a bullet wouldn't penetrate it. And then the fiber optics that were described, which fiber optics wouldn't come into vogue until around 1970. The memory material, the same type of wreckage, that again was nearly indestructible, but this you could crease, you could fold, and then this would release your grip, or you'd place it onto a table, it would unravel, it would flow like water right before your eyes. None of those witnesses of those alternative explanations ever describe that type of wreckage. Yet, unanimously, all the legitimate witnesses at Roswell, whether military, whether civilian, even down to the children involved, report those same characteristics. And then when you have General Arthur Exon, who was lieutenant colonel at T2, which involved intelligence and technical research at that time. So this would have been at Foreign Technology, as it eventually became known, FTD. And as a result, Exxon, who was a trainee at Foreign Technology in '47, was aware of the Roswell material coming in. And I will also throw into the mix the late Colonel Robert Friend, who was the second last director of Project Blue Book. And how many know that Friend was also stationed at Wright Field in July of '47?
I didn't know that. Yeah.
And he too discounted the balloon explanation, because why would they be bringing a balloon in for testing and analysis here? So he also raised the level of the material coming in. Now, granted, he would only suggest that it was a broken arrow, that it was an errant atomic bomb, that had been retrieved. And it was like, well, Colonel, we had no other bombs after Fat Man and Little Boy in our arsenal at that time after, the end of World War II. So where did this other atomic bomb, come from? And he would just smile at me, every time I would bring it up to him. But he knew it involves something much higher as far as their security, their secrecy at that time. But here was Exxon, who would describe that at first they thought it had to be Soviet in nature because no one could recognize the wreckage that came in. And then for all the testing, the tensile strength, the microscopic analysis, all of the metallurgical examination of the material, as Exxon described. Now, Exxon, who would go on to become the base commander at Wright-Patt in 1964. So for him to say that it was a unanimous consensus at Foreign Technology that the material that was brought in to Wright Field within days after Roswell was from space, that it was not manufactured on this earth. Albeit it was secondhand, but nonetheless, it's a former base commander at Wright-Patt. It's someone who was there. And then you toss it in with all the other witnesses who were there at the time that the materials came in, and the fact that you can document from the Pentagon to General Roger Ramey at Carswell Army Airfield, from the press who were documenting as far as the transfers of the wreckage, that it was all going to Wright Field for analysis and breakdown and testing. A documented fact. Even that FBI telex that went out from the Bureau office in Dallas that evening, which refuted General Ramey at the infamous weather balloon press conference that it's nothing more than a round target device. And the Dallas FBI is saying, oh no, the material is still going on the Wright Field because we're in telephonic conversation with right field, and the wreckage is still going to right field, no matter what General Ramey says. So there's a chain of involvement. It's for the same reason that we sought and tracked down as many of the right field witnesses as we could. And then to find out that within months after right field accepted and tested the wreckage, that they contracted Battelle Institute just down the road in Columbus, Ohio, just down the road from Dayton, and that they had contracted Battelle, provided they would supply them with enough basis for research to come up with what they called self-healing metal. Well, isn't it interesting that we're now hearing that very terminology being bandied about? Self-healing metal. Well, that was in reference to Roswell. And that's precisely what, when we learned that there was such a project, and that we learned that there was a project report, project number 2, that came out in 1949. So then we were hot on the trail for, obviously, project report number 1. And we found out that the very scientists who were involved, who had made earlier statements, who had access, who claimed that they had seen actual wreckage from Roswell, had held it in their hands, and that it clearly demonstrated memory characteristics and was nearly indestructible. They were part of those very projects. They wrote up as far as assessments of those testings that went on months after Roswell. So there is your connection. And then as we came up with the demonstration of nitinol that came out in the late 60s, which was the closest thing that we came up with, the combination of both as far as nickel and titanium, and that whether especially in surgical instrumentation, that you can twist and that you can bend it and it returns back to its original shape and size, all dating back to Roswell in July of 1947. And I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is not just coincidence. The amazing thing is that you can plug this all in and it all connects back to Wright Field, Wright-Patterson, and the very witnesses back then. You had asked about Dick D'Amato. And Dick D'Amato, who had met with just Marcel Jr., as you mentioned, right at the Capitol building, and they went to a lower level. And D'Amato told him that this was all true, that Roswell was true, but that it was part of, the black budget, and that it was buried so deep that much of the black budget was to ensure that Roswell remained secret, that it would never see the light of day. And I remember Jess telling me thereafter that when he returned home, that he was never so uneasy, even in the plane, right back, that he felt that something was going to happen. And that's from someone who had served over in Vietnam. And then, as we know, Grant, how, just imagine, at the age of 69, he is reactivated in the Air National Guard, and he is sent over to Iraq to serve 2 tours of duty. And he returns home a shadow of a man. He is broken. I mean, here, someone who was an athlete, someone who was an avid bicyclist, motorcyclist. I remember we would have contests jumping up from a standstill up on picnic tables. And to see him now with leg braces, and it destroyed him. And his family, and I can tell you this for a fact, is convinced to this day that it was to take him out, that it was to destroy him. And it effectively worked. And that's what's sad, that people, I'm sorry, I've reached a point in my life that there's no such thing as coincidence any longer, that things happen for a reason. And I defy any of the scoffers, the debunkers, to cite me another example of someone who is 69 years old and is reactivated by the military. Sorry, doesn't happen, hasn't happened, and it only happened with Colonel Jesse Marcel Jr. And once again, it destroyed him because he wasn't backing down. Even after Captain then Major James McAndrews, who came out with both the Project Mogul report and then with the crash dummy report in May of 1997. And most are aware, Grant, that McAndrew was calling up Colonel Marcel on a regular basis.
Wow.
And was arguing with him over and over again, like, you know, Marcel, what is it going to take you to finally accept that all you saw in your parents' kitchen that night were pieces of shrunk masking tape with flowers painted on them?
Wow.
And to his credit, you know, Colonel Marcel never backed down 1 inch. And the last time that McAndrew called him, McAndrew, according to both Jess and his wife, Linda, said he was screaming over the phone, "What's it gonna take for you to finally accept that?" And then Colonel Marcel finally, very politely said to him, "Well, first of all, Major, I would remind you to have a little more respect for a senior officer.
Wow.
And then you will never get me to testify that I saw anything less than what my father presented to us that night in our very kitchen at the Marcel residence at that time." And what's crucial here, Grant, is the fact that then McAndrew very snidely went, "Well, Colonel, I guess we'll never know what you actually saw back then."
Wow.
And he conceded. The point is, for the first time, the very author of the Project Mogul report and the crash dummy report conceded that he accepted that whatever Major Marcel and his son saw that evening, that he'll never know, or at least he would not accept, that it was the Mogul balloon that he so, passionately tried to prove. And so that's again what makes, Jess Jr. such a hero in my eyes, because he never backed down 1 inch. He never gave in, 1 inch as to his hands, something, as his father said, not made on this earth.
Beautiful. Nicole, go ahead. You're on mute.
Sorry, I let my dog in. He was going to be a little loud. So I did want to backtrack just a little bit. Moments ago, when you were talking about these or working with these heavy hitters in regression and hypnosis therapy, like Bud Hopkins,
yes,
and
Don Mack,
and Mac, there is a pretty good base of skeptics out there that disagree with regression or hypnosis, and they use it as ammunition in a way, falling back on the argument that it's pseudoscience, or it can be too subjective. I was wondering if you would maybe round out your thoughts on that a little bit, because
yes,
it seems you do think of it as a useful tool for experiencers. So
that's what's crucial by your very description, that it is a useful tool. It's part of the process. It's part of the investigation. When it becomes the sole tool, like as Grant, as we were talking about Sherry Wild, the fact that there too, we went back to that stretch of road. We saw the name of that street. We saw, as far as we relived, as far as that entire drive sequence that Sunday morning to go meet as far as with her girlfriend to go shopping, that type of thing. And we often would sit with Bud Hopkins. And one of the things that we always would counsel him in that he would retain more information to serve as a control, that he wouldn't put everything out in his writing. He wouldn't put everything out on the table. We did the same thing with our Roswell investigation. You just don't put it all out there to potentially contaminate and coach, future witnesses. And unfortunately, whether it was with the first book, Missing Time, and then certainly with Intruders, more and more of it was, being released to the public. And to our chagrin, we disagreed with that. And Bud did not have the medical, he didn't have the hypnotic regression credentials that would have been preferred, such as like Yvonne Smith has in Los Angeles and others of that ilk. John Max, certainly with Harvard Medical School, but there too, he was not trained in regression. And what's interesting is that whether it was with Bud Hopkins, whether it was with Dr. John Mack, whether it was with Dr. David Jacobs, much of their own philosophy, much of their own interpretation of the UFO experience, the UFO event, spills over. For Bud, his abductees, the people that he has worked with, come across as being very violated. That is, hence he uses the word intruders, that they in many respects are like rape victims. They have been assaulted. They have been removed from their bedrooms, their homes, their cars, because that's how Bud perceives the UFO phenomena. With John Mack, he was very much into the environment, and as a result, his abductees perceived themselves to be like chosen ambassadors, that they were selected to go out and represent the best interests of the so-called, intruders, the invaders, the aliens, that they were part of this vanguard to go out and educate, the world as to saving the planet. So it was his personal philosophy that was spilling over into his research. And then with Dave Jacobs, where he believes in the total infiltration of the phenomenon, that they are slowly taking over, that through the crossbreeding of aliens and human beings, that they have slowly now taken over the highest elements of our education, our corporations, our government, and hence this book, The Threat, for example, that they're getting ready to slowly usher in their total dominance, their takeover of planet Earth. So that is Dr. Jacobs' personal philosophy of the UFO phenomena. Well, getting back to Stanley Mitchell, what was wonderful in working with him, he had no prior UFO involvement. He worked strictly with medical doctors, as I described. He developed battlefield hypnosis. So in working with doctors at that level, he worked with doctors as far as their surgical procedures. He worked with law enforcement in the actual investigation of criminal investigation, in going through this process of elimination to derive a final solution as to who the primary suspects were, who drove what particular vehicle, who could provide the most detailed description of a potential suspect, and utilizing hypnosis as a tool that then could serve to substantiate that investigation. Now, granted, the whole problem with hypnosis as to UFO investigation, we can't provide that criminal suspect. We can't provide that abductee. We can't, abductor. We can't provide that physical evidence that will finally demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that we're dealing with actual intruders, someone who is actually interacting with people here on planet Earth. And so with Mitchell, we could always substantiate his hypnosis. If his hypnosis could demonstrate a license number, it could be verified thereafter. If his hypnosis could then serve to provide a basis for a surgical procedure, again, it could be demonstrated. So it then also could apply towards the same procedure involving UFOs. And that's what intrigued him. And that's why Sherry Wild's abduction experience is so rock solid, because it's with someone short of providing the actual mugshots of the abductors that he approached it, utilizing that same technique, those same techniques. And as a result, short of that, everything else demonstrates and provides a scenario that nothing else makes sense. Nothing else may apply. Daydreaming, fugue state, as far as, her husband, actually accused her of being gang raped and that she brought this on herself. And, I was witness to all that as well. And actually brought response so that it caused the breakup of her marriage at that time. But what was great was that there was Stan Mitchell always saying, no, what she was describing under hypnosis was no different than a criminal investigation, no different than a medical procedure, that this regression was providing eyewitness testimony as she relived it in the first person. And just because it happens to describe a UFO experience should not disqualify it from an actual occurrence. And it was just wonderful to be there. Sad to watch what she had experienced, but nonetheless, it convinced me all the more that she was describing an actual firsthand experience. And again, rock solid case.
They're very powerful when we do get the opportunity to see regression sessions from experiencers. I remember the first time I listened to Jim Peniston's, and it was just a short clip. And I've heard for a while now that his full sessions, that they're planning on releasing those. And I think that's a thing that people don't realize, that you just don't go see somebody and, they pendulum swing something and you're out like you see in movies. These regression sessions do take time, and for a lot of people, they last several hours and they're repeated. It's not just you go in and find out what happened that you don't remember. It's way more detailed than that, and it has evolved over the years.
And if I may add, as a transcript that had nothing to do with abductions. And Grant, as we were talking a few moments ago about just Marcel Jr. And and Stan Mitchell at that time was not available. He was actually ill. He died a young man. He was barely 50 years old, and he died of kidney failure. And so we sought out someone of nearly, and I would say just as high qualification, just as high caliber, in that of the late Dr. John Watkins, who was a professor emeritus at the University of Montana in Missoula. He was the doctor who got the Hillside Strangler to confess under regression. And we had Dr. Watkins take Jesse Marcel Jr. back to that late night, that early morning of July 8th, 1947, to the night his father woke him from a deep sleep, took him out to the kitchen, and all that wreckage that was scattered on the floor and on the kitchen table, and had him relive that entire evening. And it was like professional resistance, doctor against doctor, that went on for hours. And then we had, because we were coming off of all that work with with Stan Mitchell, and we took Jess Jr. back a few years earlier, and we had him describe experiences with his dad. And he described how on one occurrence, his dad, and Jess Jr. was an only child, and he was so proud of his father. And his dad had him go to pick up a pecan pie with his bicycle, and how the pie fell off of his bicycle basket. And he wasn't afraid of the fact that it happened, but that he would disappoint his dad, that he so looked forward to the look on his dad's eyes when he would bring this pie home for him. And then as he's describing that, and then the death of their dog, and then, okay, the night your father takes you out into the kitchen, and then he starts to describe in the first person how his dad is saying over and over again, wreckage, pieces, debris of a flying saucer. Not once does he describe an aircraft, a balloon, a plane, a rocket, over and over again. First person, flying saucer. And we did this in the company of a film crew from the NBC Today Show. You never saw this, did you?
No.
Because after it was finished, because it was so, again, rock solid, it was so convincing that they felt it was too controversial. And the co-host of the Today Show, then Brian Gumbel, was the one who nixed it. He said, we can't show this because it is too convincing.
Wow.
Now just imagine that. Too convincing. Wow. Quickly, Jess Jr., we never considered this. His father had just passed away just 4 years before. It was just 4 years before. And when Dr. Watkins brought him out of the trance, and we even had him sketch the symbology as he saw them, as he was examining the I-beams. Those sketches you see are from that regression, as he was actually handling the pieces. And Jess is opening his eyes, and he's coming to. And he looks around the room, and he goes, Dad? Dad? And then the tears start streaming down his face, and it's like, oh my God, we never foresaw this. He's losing his dad all over again. He's realizing it was so real that his dad was there with him, right there in that room, reliving that experience. And now his dad was once again gone. So it was like, oh, we can never do that again. So that's, again, how do you then look at the man and say, yeah, like Major McAndrew was trying to do, yeah, but I still don't believe you. You're still lying. You still saw nothing more than masking tape with flowers painted on it. That's the advantage that we have had all along. We've been there with these witnesses. We've seen them relive. We've listened to them describe to the point of tears and describing the bodies, describing what they witnessed firsthand. And I'm sorry, they are either all the greatest actors in the world or they're reliving exactly what they experienced back in 1947. Mm-hmm. And I certainly have not, I don't believe, I am totally convinced of the latter. I'm convinced. There's no other explanation. They were there. They are describing exactly what they saw, what they experienced.
Wonderful. I agree with you too. I think it's so powerful and so honest. And any experiencer that I had the pleasure of hearing their testimony. It is a tell. There's with everyone, you see how hard it is for them to describe what they're going through, and there's some honesty with that. I think we can all feel that, you know, when we're in discussions with people. We know when we're being lied to or, you know, manipulated a little bit. But to move this conversation on a little bit more,
I'm sorry.
we've touched a little bit on ufology's sort of love affair with Hollywood or the entertainment industry. You know, we brought up Ancient Aliens a little bit, or some other films that, you know, get certain aspects right, but yet they get so much wrong in the dramatization of everything. And I wanted to bring up your work with Mr. James Fox and his movie, The Phenomenon. And he gave me kind of a tip off. He said you might have a really good story from China that you could share with us as well. He said you had a fun story from your time there. But let's talk about the film, The Phenomenon, and your work with that and him.
Well, it's very unfortunate that the film, and it is a feature film, was slated for release now next month, September. And hi there. And the idea that everything is shut down worldwide. And we had high hopes that there would also be a release of the film in China. Tremendous audience potential. And that this was a film that, because you talk about heavy hitters, you talk about former chair of the Joint Chiefs, you talk about former governors, senators, congressmen, going on the record and, you know, describing how we're not being told the truth about this. We talked about Dick D'Amato a few moments ago, that they are, you know, risking their very careers in saying that, ladies and gentlemen, there's an actual UFO phenomenon. And we need to public demand that the government, even if it be an admission of total ignorance on the subject, they at least need to acknowledge there is a phenomenon. They need to acknowledge that for 73 years, that we are still working on this. We are still, you know, scrambling on these unknowns. Where, you know, we're sending up aircraft with the hope of at least coming up with answers as to what form of, you know, what level of technology we're dealing with. I know, James, they've done some, you know, wonderful recreations of the Westfall incident in Australia. And I was over there last November. Just I call it the Australian Roswell, just for the number of people who were involved. And one of the things that our documentary, which was originally named 701, and personally, I wish we would have kept that, because as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the program, what's significant about the term or the word 701 is that was exactly the number of unknowns, of unexplains, that Blue Book finished with, 701. But Westfall, to talk with the witnesses, and again, to go to the elementary school, to go to the high school, to talk to the now teachers who were students back in '66 when that event happened, to talk to people who were out on the soccer field, children who were out on the playground, and who were quickly ushered into the school because they were fearful for this object as it passes, you know, in close proximity of the power lines. You know, it's just 100 feet above them. And then as the object moved out over the park, and to go out to the park and see where it touched down, and to see where the students even went over the fence and raced across the street, and then observed it within 100 feet before it ascended and lifted away. And then to ask that crucial question. And it's one of the things that the Fox movie is going to demonstrate over and over again, whether it's Australia, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's Zimbabwe in Africa, whether it's Brazil, in South America, when asked, were there American suits present? And that's the one question that I always ask in dealing with a foreign report. Were there American suits? And when I hear, well, as a matter of fact, like Westfall, yes, we were questioned by American investigators. I mean, we were told to shut up. We were told not to ever, mention anything about this again by Americans. Well, why are we in the driver's seat? Why are, Americans the ones that are calling the shots on this on an international level? And I always, again, harken back to Roswell. Well, the one thing that placed America in the driver's seat was Roswell, that we gained possession of actual hardware. We had one that we could always place on the bargaining table, so to speak, regarding foreign affairs. Well, you better play hardball with us because, we have one. We're developing the technology. We're reverse engineering what we found back in 1947. So you better play good with us, that type of thing. And I personally believe that much of foreign aid on our regard is hush money. That you cooperate with us, we will pay you for it. We will provide you with foreign aid, so to speak. So it all gets back to what may have happened back in 47. So much of this is going to be portrayed in this movie. And like everyone also in Hollywood that is waiting for the theaters to be reopened and to once again, this film needs to be seen in the theaters. I would hate to think that it's just going to be delegated once again to so many other documentaries on the TV screen, because for especially James, this has been such a labor of love. I mean, my God, he's worked on this now for, I believe, over 7 years. And
I think it's even longer than that. I think it's past the decade mark or it's close.
I think overall, and much of it involves the original involvement of again, screenwriter Tracy Torme.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I would sit down with Tracy, and every time I would be out in Hollywood, and I would bring up to him, I go, Tracy, if Michael Moore can do it, and if Al Gore can do it, we certainly can do it. Enough of this made for TV, a documentary. We need to hit the big screen. We can't rely on the cable networks. We can't rely on Peter Jennings, his primetime ABC special on UFOs, which I was also involved with, and I knew it was going to be nothing more than a hatchet job. I knew it. So we got to take our case to the people, to the public ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's where when Tracy originally sat down with James, okay, let's do a feature. Let's take it to the big screen. And so it's just now a case of waiting for the theaters to be reopened, and we'll find ourselves with a premiere and air dates. And
yes, we're all anxiously waiting. I know James was kind enough to give me a sneak peek on it months and months ago, and it's been it's been terrible because now in our current climate with ufology and with it making the news and all the fun that's happening right now, I just want to be able to go watch the phenomenon. It's the history we've all been waiting for, laid out cinematically. The sound on it is fabulous. And this is a special time in ufology, and it helps put some pieces together for people that need educated or re-educated in our field, or more importantly, those outside of our field that are new and are just now interested in this, or have decided that after years of blowing it off, it's like, oh, here, now it's not just the weather balloon. We have to look at this seriously again. And so it's so great that this film is coming out, and it's so moving. I actually wept at two parts in the film. The letters to Lonnie Zamora,
Yes.
the readings of those, it was just powerful. And to hear in some detail the repercussions of telling his story. And he's such a great witness. And we talk about these perfect witnesses, and just
And
that was very moving. And then, of course, seeing Stanton Friedman's dedication at the end of it was really moving for me. It was, you know.
And you know where the interview with Stanton even took place was down in Brazil, of all places, because there were a number of us who were in Brazil at the time. And James, you know, should we talk to Stanton? And it's like, well, how can we not talk to Stanton? And so, of all places. But I know it's one of the reasons our book that came out last year on Right Pat, actually, it was the revised edition of the Right Pat book, and Stanton, it was the last foreword that he wrote, and then we dedicated the book to him as well. And so much of this, we had hoped that Stan would have had time to actually experience, that he would have had some vindication, that he himself would have been able to experience some finality, that there would have been some closure, even if it would have been at least accepting or realizing that it was finally happening, that we were at the crossroads of where all we have to do is keep pushing, that the general public will finally say enough of the subterfuge, enough of this level of security and secrecy that too many have taken to their graves.
Right.
That we're the government. We're supposed to be calling the shots. We're supposed to, you know, have total transparency as to what our governments are allocating, you know, budgets, black budgets, even if that be the case, but we're still paying for it. You know, our taxes still pay for such technology, for such investigations. And the very thought that you're still claiming something was a weather balloon after 73 years, I'm sorry, you're insulting not only all of our intelligence, but you're clearly covering something up. Yeah. Even if it's our own technology, we deserve to know the truth. And Stan was, you know, one of the champions, one of the people who led the charge. And sadly, he is missing much of this. Now, that's why I'm so proud of so many of my colleagues who are not resting on their laurels right now, that once this all reopens, that we're going to get, once again, we're going to hit as far as the pavement with both legs running. We're just not going to very, you know, cautiously and incrementally pick up where we left off. We're ready. And one of them certainly being the James Fox movie. And I know there's another new series on the History Channel will be coming out this fall, and many other elements, and hopefully even the Navy, that there will be forthcoming disclosures that this isn't just going to be an occasional carrot that tantalizes us with possibilities as to, are we going to have disclosure in our lifetimes, or are we always going to revert back to, yes, but there's nothing to disclose? Well, we know there's 73 years of accumulated data, of accumulated information. I mean, Grant is certainly aware of the fact that when Blue Book was declassified, it mentions over 20 gun camera cases alone. Now, not a single frame of footage, certainly none of the actual gun camera film. So just like the film, like the footage from the Nimitz, wouldn't we love to see that in conjunction with what Fravor and the other pilots observed, you know, back in 2000, 2004 and 2005. So there is still so much raw information for the government to still hoard this material. There are many of us that have a much greater education on the subject. And that's one of the reasons that I'd like to believe that that's why they're now consulting with us. They're now, well, what can you tell us about Roswell? What can you tell us about other military situations? What can you tell us about these other witnesses? Because then we can plug in that data and it will further solidify these cases as being truly and genuinely off the earth events that leave, no other explanation to consider.
Let's continue the disclosure talk a little bit. But Grant, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, you brought up Stanton Friedman. You may know I've got access to the Stanton Friedman collection.
Yes.
And we got 6,000 pages, and Nicole is going to help me analyze some of this material. I'm going back once the COVID thing is over. They predict it's going to be 4 years to go through the collection. Yeah. And I can actually give you access with a click of a mouse. I can give you access to the files. If you were going to look at Stanton's material, is there anything I should be looking for? Like you knew him in terms of stuff that he may have talked about. Like I looked at the one was the Cuban missile, where the Cuban jet gets shot down. I knew Stan had worked on that case.
Was that 66?
Yeah, and I found the file, and I found out the guy he was talking to. So if you can give me sort of an insight, if you were going to look at the Stanton files, what kind of things do you know that he was working on that he was sort of keeping to himself that we might be looking for? And would you want access to the files? I can give you access to the files as we recover them. They're kind of like you've got to go through them, page by page. It's a long,
and
thing.
As they probably described to you, because originally Stan was sending, we first were going through his library, his books, and then we have a good number of his videotapes, his CDs, DVDs, that type of thing, at our museum in Roswell. And then a month before he, unfortunately passed away, which was a shock to all of us because he had already, as you both remember, had announced his retirement. And we had a retirement celebration at the festival in Roswell just the year before. And then when he announced that, well, no, he had his doctor's approval to once again go on the road. He was doing more lectures, and he was going to be at that next year's festival. And we had high hopes that there was going to be a continuation of providing more and more of his material, his files, to the museum in Roswell. And then I think he became concerned that we were going to investigate his material, that we were going to actually follow up on specifically his Roswell files, because we always had a standing agreement with Stan. Should we find anything that corroborates, your scenario, your theories on Roswell, you'll be the first, Stan. And should you find any witnesses that, corroborate, our position, we then expect the same from you. So this was this two-way exchange that in many respects was more one-sided, because I think Stan was so focusing on the plains of St. Augustine and Gerald Anderson at that time that he wasn't, looking into anything, closer to Roswell where we were focusing. So, and I think it's Joanne who, I think of her last name, she's the head archivist at the Fredericton, New Brunswick archives there. And I remember when they were first picking up all the material, and she was talking about how many van loads of material, and that none of the material was collated. Nothing of it was chronological. There was no such thing as a 1947 drawer, 1966 drawer.
Yeah, she described it to me the way she described it. Stan was more of a stacker than a filer.
A collector, a stacker, exactly. And so, and initially, when their people, their archivists were going through the material, that's why it's wonderful, Grant, that you and anyone else that can assist them, because she was telling me too that they can foresee this taking 4 to 5 years overall. Yeah. And so the one thing specifically is anything concerning Roswell, because Stan had a 10-year jump in advantage on us. So there were witnesses he was speaking to that were gone by the time we became involved, and nobody was lecturing. Nobody was more publicly in the forefront, in the public, as Stanton was. And as a result, I'm sure there were people that he hopefully took down names, contact numbers, that type of thing. So I don't want to, again, spread ourselves into other areas. I'll leave that to you, Grant, and others that you may feel can assist. But specifically, anything pertaining to Roswell, anything pertaining to a potential Roswell lead, family, secondhand, third hand, that you could pass on to us, that then we can follow up on. It may be quite fascinating that we may have witnesses that corroborate these witnesses that Stan, wasn't even aware of. And we would then have the wherewithal, we would make it a point to follow up. And we would always come back to you and Grant and say, well, we checked out a particular lead that Stan had from 1983. And we followed up. The party was now passed away, but the family was able to provide us with, a little secondhand information. And so it will keep things going. Yeah. And certainly all credit to Stan and yourself, Grant, for, wading through all this material because of all the time. Archive research certainly does take, but then allow us to actually, once again, go into the field and follow up. So specifically Roswell-related information, Grant. So if you could do that, we would be forever grateful.
Yeah. The only problem with it is it's like, as you said, there was really no files. It's sort of all mixed together. One of the things that was kind of interesting that they told me, and I'm waiting, they have an audio-visual archives. What they told me is he taped a lot of his phone calls, which I don't know if anybody knew. So he would have a lot of phone calls, like this Cuban case, where it's evident there's going to be a phone call conversation with this guy, and they haven't gone through it. The other thing was, it's kind of weird where you see archivist people who have no clue. Like they said, when they did the collection, they got a lot of blowback from people around. It was like, what are you doing? Like, this is like a provincial archives that looks at death certificates, property and stuff like that. And they're like, why are you looking at this guy's files? He wasn't even a Canadian. So why are you doing this? But he was so famous there that she did it. So you consider they've got, I think, 4 archivists working for 5 years. That's a lot of money they're throwing at this thing. So she had to sell this thing, but they have no idea. So she asked me for, can you give me a list of topics and stuff? So I would mention all the different skeptics and stuff. Right. She said, like Phil Klass, she said, oh yeah, we know about that guy already. Because they have no idea whatsoever about anything. They haven't got a clue. So they actually had the one thing, there's actually a Roswell piece. Someone sent him a Roswell piece. Yes. They just had it attached to a piece of paper. And I said to them, I said, you gotta cover this thing. Somebody's got to walk off of this piece. And it looked like Stan had never analyzed it. He had received it in an envelope. And so they've got it sort of under lock and key. I think they've got 6 pieces that in order to look at these things that Stan had, you need an archivist to be with you when you look at the material. But they had no idea. They just had put this thing in the file. And when I saw that, I said, you better hide this thing. And that's where it's like a gold mine. It's like going through King Tut's tomb and looking for stuff that Stan maybe had talked about to people, but he never made public. It's quite fascinating. So I will, as much as I can, send you material that might help you.
Please, by all means. And how close are you to his residence?
Well, I'm pretty far. I'm halfway across the country.
But once you would go to the archives, how close would you then be?
Well, when I go to the archives, I go there for like 2 weeks. I get an Airbnb, and then I just go to the archives every day. So I got 6,000 pages the first time,
Right.
and this time I'll probably pick up whatever they've got, maybe 15,000 pages the second time. And I don't really read it. I just, because you got to move so fast. So I just take a camera and I photograph as fast as I can photograph, and you can read it when you get home. So that's basically what I'm doing, is I'm going through the files as quickly as I can, because it's massive. As you know, it's 15 pallet of things, of files. It was the entire basement.
Basement and the garage, half the garage.
Yeah. And his wife never went down there. So it's a massive, massive collection. Will take years, but I'm sure we're going to find something in there that like, you're a researcher, I'm a researcher. You can't follow every single lead. There's just too much material. And there's going to be something in there where you'll click on it and you'll go, oh, he knew about this. And you'll get a piece of document that nobody's ever seen before, and that he just didn't have time to follow up on.
What I was going to also suggest next time you are in Fredericton, is to, if you have the time, go to the residence.
Yeah.
And what I had suggested to Joanne at the archives is that if they had the time, if they had someone, that once everything was cleared out, assume that Stan may have had a hiding place, something else, behind a heat register, loose floorboards, anywhere else behind a file cabinet that he may have stashed, he may have hidden some things that, because Hynek, for example, he had things hidden under drawers, under file cabinets.
Wow.
And so we need to at least consider the man.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're working on something that in many elements of it are rather clandestine, and as a result, we should again look under every rock.
Yeah.
And
the only problem with that is I think they've sold the house. I think the wife has moved and sold the house as of last time they're selling the house. But she may have done it. I'll have to ask her.
You
the problem
should.
with it now is we have to wait for the archives to open. Like, you can't go in there because of the COVID thing.
Right.
So they may be still filing material in the background. But it's just a massive collection,
right.
And I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you might be interested. So I'll give you access to whatever I can, and try to isolate the Roswell material as much as I can, because there's piles of stuff. But as you know, it's just like all this stuff is sorted and it's not in files, and the ones that they've got so far actually were in the filing cabinet. The rest of it apparently was stacked as high as the ceiling, just in stacks of paper. And these type of people, they can actually tell you where in the stack of paper the document is. But they just went in, and she just looked at him and she said, "Stan, like, could you couldn't have filed this stuff?" He said, "I didn't have an assistant, I didn't have an assistant."
And in his case, you're talking over 50 years of accumulated material.
Yeah, massive.
And massive. So thank God, and hopefully once things reopen, that you're going to be able to make a dent into it. But again, I think better than I, it's going to take years.
Okay, Nicole, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's if you mentioned the residence changed hands now, that might be the ideal time to make contact with the new owners, though, because I know my family renovates and flips houses, and we often do old rehabilitation on houses, and you always find interesting treasures if you know what you're looking for, or if you're a hobbyist for some things. But there are so many people that just find stuff, Don, like you mentioned, in floorboards or up in rafters or in the attic crawl space, and they're like, "Oh, here's somebody else's junk," and in the dumpster it goes. So,
right.
I mean, I don't know if the new owners know anything like that, but about Stanton and his importance in our field, but it might just be a phone call of, "Hey, if you find something you think is junk, don't throw it out, throw it in a box for me." So,
I mean, we will all agree that he took the subject so serious that above everything else, he saved everything. He didn't toss, and as a result, I like to believe that at times he was very discriminating, and that he would segregate certain things that he felt were a little more sensitive. And as a result, he, again, may have placed them elsewhere. And so at least we should keep that in our mind.
Interesting. So now let's discuss disclosure a little bit and your thoughts on our current climate here. But I'll segue a little bit with our little chat on the phenomenon. There were two very interesting people that were interviewed, at least in my opinion, that are directly related to right now, and that is former Senator Harry Reid and John Podesta.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you could give us your thoughts on those two players, our current climate of disclosure, and maybe throw in a little thoughts on TTSA.
Well, we know that the former Senator Harry Reid was very influential in even getting the funding put up as far as the special UFO project at the Pentagon at the time, when those of us within the field felt that they had washed their hands of the subject. And I mean, you know, personally, we always knew they were still investigating the phenomena post Project Blue Book. Even Hynek was involved for 4 years after Blue Book. And another example, he saved the documentation that he had hidden for us to discover, you know, after, I mean, posthumously. And his job description was that he was a consultant on controversial aerial phenomenon. Well, what else is that? Except, I mean, I have colleagues that say, well, it doesn't necessarily mean UFOs. Well, I'm sorry, you know, it's you people are of the anything but extraterrestrial crowd. That everything, you know, it always will come just to the brink. But sorry, you know, we have to cross that line. If there's nothing else, if every other possibility, like the old Sherlock Holmes axiom, when you've eliminated all the possible and you're only faced to accept the impossible, you have to accept the impossible. And if you still want to believe extraterrestrial falls in that category, that's more of a hang-up on your part, not ours, and certainly not the phenomenon, because the phenomenon continues to demonstrate off-the-world technology. Mm-hmm. When you continue to talk about as far as flight characteristics that defy the laws of physics, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we may be on the brink, but there's nothing that we have in our arsenal right now. Maybe they're going to spring this on us in a year or two. That, ladies and gentlemen, we finally have anti-gravity. You know, we have technology. I belong to the EAA, and you know, we have the annual air show up in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and I'm there for 2-3 days every air show. And I never forget when they unveiled the F-35, the Raptor, and the watch as far as that fighter approach, and then as far as that high speed, all at once tip its nose up, and then just sit there bobbing up and down on its thrusters as it is hovering. And all at once it kicks in its afterburners and it just shoots straight up like a rocket, 10,000 feet within a matter of seconds. So yes, we're getting there, but my God, it shook the ground. I mean, the sound of it, you know, clearly demonstrated that, yeah, we are getting there, but our technology is still very Earth-like in that it's still dealing with jet propulsion. It's still dealing with jet rocket propulsion that goes back, it harkens back to the 1940s. It lets you know it's still earthly technology. It's of earthly design. And UFOs are too often described as being totally silent. They don't even create air turbulence. They don't even affect as far as, I mean, you don't even track them on radar at times. So yes, we have stealth technology, but you still have a small signal. And yet this is something that, again, it breaks the rules. And I think as a result, we're still trying to come up, we're still trying to find the on button if we have one in our possession. As with Roswell, as I said before, I'm convinced we have. But is it a case of, again, slowly conditioning the masses, conditioning the general public to accept the inevitable? Or is it dangling that carrot and then once again reeling us back in? Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that we went through with Hynek on a number of occasions, that he would be whisked down to, WGN in Chicago, that there was going to be an announcement that Washington had tipped them off. I mean, I was there on one of those occasions, and Hynek's excitement that Washington says they might say something tonight, and they want me there to present my response, my reaction, and to see his disappointment. And even after Hynek passed away, we had the same situation, that Kufos was tipped off that we should all be ready to make our way to Washington, that there was going to be an announcement. And we were strung along for weeks, and then a couple months, and then how it all fell apart. So this may seem like virgin territory, but it's not. There are a few of us oldsters who have been through this before. But the difference is, it's now a branch of the military that is dangling the carrot. It's a senior senator who is involved. It's a current senator in the guise of Marco Rubio who is involved and is saying, I want a report by next year, and a report that then will be sent to Congress from the Pentagon, and then with the proviso that it will also be released to the public. The stakes are certainly raised. We've never been here before, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm glad you're pointing that out, because we've had several discussion panels on disclosure, and that's something that we've tried to discuss against some skeptics that just say, oh, been there, done that. This is a repeat. We've seen it all with Blue Book and the Condon Report, and we're going to see it again here in this situation. So it's nice to hear you say that the playbook has changed, or at least maybe some of the rules of the disclosure game have.
Well, and even the attempt, like with the Commander Fravor, who was head of the squadron off of the Nimitz, and for the likes of like Seth Saltek to suggest that, well, he may be highly trained, as a pilot, but he's not trained to observe alien aircraft. Well, hell, I mean, I'm sorry. There again, the process of elimination. What greater witness who is trained in observing earthly technology, earthly aircraft? Certainly better than you, Dr. Salchak. So the point being, if he says it wasn't anything made here, if he says that the maneuverability, the flight characteristics were like nothing that any earthbound aircraft would possess, I think he then is in a very good position to then say the only thing left, the only thing that would still qualify would be something manufactured off the planet. I mean, Dr. Salchak, you're looking for, radio waves that are just fluttering about out in deep space. And the very idea that somebody of an advanced technology would still be using radio waves, so you have lifetime employment, and clearly UFOs are a threat to your meal steak. I mean, you're the one who's getting all the grant funding as far as your pet project. We're not. So you're, again, just like we were talking earlier about MUFON and UFO investigators protecting their territory, protecting their turf. Sorry, that's all you're dealing with. That's the only thing that you are actually representing. You're protecting your grants, your special funding, and you really have nothing to provide to the argument.
That is interesting. I know we hear often when we're talking about disclosure, you can get so far, and with these special access programs, it comes down to don't messing with the money. And, that's one thing that's interesting. I think it's a double-edged sword with what we're seeing now with breakthroughs in technology that are in the public sector now. And we see these, the videos come out from the Navy, of course, and now Rubio, like you said, he's at the forefront of gathering this data. But it's interesting that the Navy is throwing in its hat. They are very much at the forefront of pushing R&D and technology.
And keeping in mind, as we've talked about mentioning the declassification of Project Blue Book, when those files were released, 98% of the files were Air Force cases. Where were all the Navy cases? Where were all the Army cases, the other branches of the military? Didn't the Navy have their own UFO investigation? Didn't the Army? I mean, my God, Roswell was an Army incident. It was not under the purview of the Air Force. The Air Force didn't exist in 1947, July 47. So for the Air Force to still step to the fore and say, well, you know, we declassified all the cases. Yeah, you declassified some of your own case investigations. And under what jurisdiction would you have even released Navy or other branches? You wouldn't have. And so maybe it's a case also, as I suggested, that the Navy is getting tired of allowing the Air Force to speak for them.
Right.
Because as I have often, you know, even publicly stated, as far as I'm concerned, the best pilots in the military are Navy. They certainly have the greatest coverage of the planet as we know it. I mean, the Air Force is strictly within sovereign airspace, whereas the Navy, you know, throughout every, you know, ocean and through every sea throughout the world, you know, has much greater surveillance of the Earth as we would expect them to. So what I'm also very keen on and interested in is the fact that now you have elements of Washington that have described that there have been numerous briefings of Congress on UFOs for over 10 years. Well, what are you briefing them on? Ignorance? Lack of information? What are you actually telling them? So there too, there's a there. And so we'd like to know, I mean, the public needs to know that there is some pay dirt, that there are other gun camera cases. There are other profound cases within the Navy, within other branches, beyond the Air Force, because if the Air Force comes out with anything right now, you're up to 4 explanations regarding Roswell, so why should anybody give you the time of day? Because you've been deceiving and lying about UFOs for 73 years. So you just now have a change of heart? No, but the Navy can come out and say, well, we've never put out any reports. We've never acknowledged anything heretofore. But this is what we know. This is what we have discovered in our own files. And there's other gun camera footage. And there are other cases that were investigated outside of the Air Force purview. And this is what we concluded. This is what answers that we arrived at. And we are clearly dealing with someone else's aircraft. And that's the beginning of hopefully a joint effort as to not a Condon report where they relied on, you know, strictly the Air Force, and the civilian groups like NICAP and APRO provided tons of investigative reports that they never looked at. The sad thing is, the reports, the information, the data was there, and Condon and his committee never even looked at them because they were not assigned to look at them. They had a predetermined explanation and preconceived as far as solution as they were assigned to report. And let's hope that the Navy this time around will actually come out with more of the truth and less speculation as to the reality of the phenomenon.
Well, and that brings up an interesting thing with what folks are saying about the Army collaborating with TTSA as well. You know, this isn't just, again, the Air Force. And I don't know, I guess the hitch with the Air Force is we've always heard these conspiracy stories or scary stories coming out of, you know, the Office of Special Investigations. It's like, seems like you hear these guys popping up and silencing people or guiding, you know, what should be said publicly. And I don't know, do you think there's agents like that still at play right now, even though they said, you know, investigations haven't been happening, you know, since Blue Book closed or since ATIP supposedly quit? You know, we always hear these excuses, but we know they never end. And another thing, Rubio, I think in his information request, you know, he's even requesting files from the FBI.
That's correct.
So we'll see, you know, Homeland, you know, in our border investigations, as well as maybe some, you know, I guess not just military involved investigations. We'll see some from the general population, which
In the late 1970s, when Citizens for UFO Secrecy, as represented by New York attorney Peter Gersten at that time, and they specifically went after Air Force intelligence, the FBI, the CIA, and there was a bounty of material that clearly demonstrated, especially with the FBI, that they were long looking into domestic UFO cases. And then with the CIA demonstrating even on a global level. And I never will forget that there were, I believe, like 50 some, the number 57 stands out. 57 cases that the CIA would not release. And there were 3 judges that met behind closed doors for 3 days. And then their decision, which read that the public's need to know was outweighed by national security, demonstrating that at least within those CIA UFO cases, that national security was still of the utmost priority, the utmost concern. And so we need to be concerned that once again, that may be the final resolution, or at least the final roadblock that may still prevent disclosure as we would define it. That they would just throw up the national security banner and say, we, you know, ladies and gentlemen, we'd love to, but, you know, we would be revealing, you know, agents in the field and lookout posts and people who are actually working as far as in the foreign theater. And there's too much overlapping as far as UFO investigations with other assignments that just happen to involve UFO incidents. So as a result, we're going to have to once again restrict access. So we have to know our history. And for those who are saying we have been there before, yes, I can demonstrate that. We have been. And so, but where I believe they have, once again, they've raised the ante, they've raised the bar, is by acknowledging that we may be dealing with physical evidence. We may be dealing with actual crash retrieval material. And then who else? I mean, I'm going to be the first one who's going to say, well, what else are we potentially talking about? But Roswell.
Yep.
Then you throw in the situation, and Grant knows this better than anyone about the presidents. And no one has done, you know, a greater service to the study of UFOs and the presidents and other political figures than Grant Cameron has. And I'm sure he now has added the Father's Day interview of Donald Trump Jr. with the President of the United States, his father, in asking about Roswell. And we both know, and Grant would be able to corroborate this, that there is no doubt that the president knew that that question was going to be asked. In
Right.
fact, I'm sure he approved of the question in advance. And there wasn't a tacit dismissal that, oh, they tell me it was just some type of Russian spy balloon, or it was, you know, something prosaic, something conventional of that sort. He too, he opened the door to, as we know, much more. That I'm asked that question more than anything else, and millions of people know that something very important happened in Roswell, and that they go to Roswell to be where it actually happened. But Dad, are you still going to ever announce? Well, I'll have to think about it. So there's a there. There's something to announce. So are we talking about a fifth explanation? Or are we talking about, well, it was the first one. It was, as the witnesses, all of the eyewitnesses to their deathbeds testified to. It was an actual craft of unknown origin. It was something that was not major.
He said an interesting if I'm remembering the broadcast correctly. And that's what I duly noted was the it.
Yes.
But it was very exciting. And yeah, we have been discussing that often in our disclosure discussions and panels. And that was one question. There have been some of these spin-off interviews.
Politicians / government employees / military do everything for effect. There's nothing that they do. They seldom do anything that they can honestly say, I did it only for the public. I did it as far as the people. We did it strictly for, even to my political or my military detriment, we did it for the masses. No, and that's where we also have to step back. Why is the Navy doing this right now? For whose benefit? It's not going to be for ours. It's going to be for the Navy's, first of all, and they all compete. Each branch of the military competes with one another, and so that's where I personally see it more as a jab in the eye of the Air Force. You're no longer going to speak for us. And if we can demonstrate that there's a threat, that there is something that we need to be on alert to, as far as to monitor, to watch for. And we need a little bit more money from Congress. So we get a little more than the Air Force as a result, because we're monitoring more of the global skies. And then you throw in the Space Command with that, which certainly the Navy is part of. So I think we then need to accept that it may be nothing more that we're potentially dealing with something that may be invading our airspace. It may be someone else's, but it also may be someone else's out there. And as a result, we need to be more vigilant. We need to be more watchful, and we need more money. Don't give it to the Air Force, give it to the Navy. So we also have to be very accepting of the fact that it may be simply that in the long run.
I agree with you there. And it will be interesting to see what the months ahead bring. I know we're going to keep, election. Yes, after the election, and then we're looking at that, the countdown from the 180 days for Marco Rubio.
Rubio. Exactly.
February, March, maybe we'll know something by April. I know this is the most exciting times in ufology I've been in 20 years, also, 25 years.
As Rolling Stone magazine, in the current article.
Yes.
And Newsweek magazine had an article, and there will be others. that the press continues to demonstrate their total naivete on the subject. To them, it's just so much silly season.
Right.
That it will, and politics aside, it will not even matter if the president or if the Pope or if Walter Cronkite were still alive and they were to go public and say, ladies and gentlemen, there are aircraft manufactured off the planet that are invading our airspace with total impunity. We don't know where they're from, who they are, and what their agenda is. But vote for me, you know, come next election, that type of thing. Half the people still won't believe it.
Right.
And most of them would still be the press, because their fallback is going to be, well, certainly if it's all true, certainly if it's all happening, we would have been the ones to discover it. We would have been the ones to, you know, unveil this to the public, because, you know, we're the investigators, we're the watchdogs at the gate. No, you aren't. You are, you know, you have an agenda as well. And much of it is just to stay in lockstep with Washington, to do as you're told. As I've often said, much of the, you know, the media has become like professional wrestling. It's all scripted. And UFOs remains a taboo topic. It's a career breaker, especially for the media. And that's where ufology needs to come together, work together, and not let this opportunity slip past us. That when it comes to Rubio's commission, his committee, when it comes to even the president, especially if Donald Trump should get reelected, well, you made comments about Roswell. We want to follow up. What can you tell us? At least if you can tell us, I can't talk about it. It's still, you know, up here, it's still classified beyond even the office of the president. That will tell us everything. That will tell us that it is still so important that even the president can't discuss it. And for us, that will still be mission accomplished. We're going in the right direction.
I would definitely say that would be a mark in the win column. You know, it's so rare that we get to give ourselves a mark as a win. Like, we just do have to take what we get. And there are advantages to both sides, you know, after this election. If it's Biden, then here, I'll kick it to our disclosure talk with Steve Bassett. He can lay out his thoughts from the Democratic point of view so exquisitely, and I can see it happening. But then you're also right. If Trump does win this re-election, it is up to us in this field to keep pushing that needle on the comments that he's made. And I don't know, we all like Twitter, and we all know plenty of people on Twitter and social media, but that door is opened. They discuss this on Twitter and social media. So we can also do it back. We can say, hey, give us an update on Roswell Jr. Ask your dad again.
And believe me, we are following up on that with Donald Jr. When Bill Clinton was president, and during the Monica Lewinsky investigation, and when the grand jury had subpoenaed that book that she had gifted him for Christmas, and when it was retrieved from his private study, it was sandwiched between two books. One was a book on Winston Churchill, and the other was an autographed copy to the President of the United States of UFO Crash at Roswell, co-authored by Kevin D. Randall and yours truly.
Yep.
When our book Witness to Roswell came out, a personal copy autographed to the president was handed to him at that time. When George W. Bush came to Roswell, and the mayor's office contacted me the day before, we want to include in a gift basket an autographed copy of one of your books. Can you overnight something? So I know he has a personal copy.
Yep.
And I can throw into the mix his former press secretary, Dana Perino from Fox News. And after she has brought up Roswell a number of times, and one of her colleagues at Fox said, well, did you ever ask your boss? To which she responded, was a matter of fact, in the Oval Office. I asked him, Mr. President, what can you tell me about Roswell? And from behind his desk, he smiled and then he winked at me. That was it. Again, it speaks volumes.
Right.
And so I'm sorry. It's like, and I say this, and I would say it to any one of you who are right here in front of me, because you're great at always speaking, you know, behind my back. But the point is, they're the ones who started this back in 1947.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who claimed it was a flying saucer. I didn't. They did. I was a total skeptic when I came into this. I thought we'd make a single trip down to New Mexico in February of 1989, and we'd wrap this up in a single weekend, you know, prove that this was nothing more than, you know, a balloon or anything else, just as conventional. And then you start speaking to the first 10 witnesses, and one by one, they're all describing the exact same wreckage, one by one. And you realize, my God, we can't get down here fast enough, because we got to find more and more to see if the pattern continues, and they're all describing something of an unearthly nature. The point again being, they started it.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I'm concerned, they can either end it, because they're up to now 4 official that hasn't ended it, because to their deathbeds, the eyewitnesses continued to proclaim to the rest of the world it was the first one that was the correct one, that it was indeed an actual flying saucer.
Right. And I'm hopeful. I think in our current climate, I have been asking this to everybody I interview about disclosure, and I agree. I think this is going to give us Roswell. I think this is going to be the give, you know, even if they want to keep some stuff secret, which we know they're going to, and keep it hidden under national security reasons. We know that, but give us Roswell. The time is now. We'll be happy with that. We can go forward from there. And yeah, that's my hope for the future. I'm glad I can kind of share in that with you, but we're right at 2.5 hours, Don, and this has gone by so quickly. So I don't know what happened to Grant. He kind of disappeared. I didn't know if he was on mute.
He ran out of gas, right?
You never know. He might have had an emergency come up. So
exciting times.
He lets me hijack the interviews often. He left me with Melinda Leslie, and an hour passed by, and he just kind of snuck back in. So these things can go quickly, but I think we've had a really good conversation here, and I would love to have you back as the current situation unfolds. So maybe
it will unfold.
It is. I agree.
Again, we're going to keep it. We're going to keep the pressure on.
Mm-hmm.
And too often, as we were describing in the past, we rely on those who have less than our best interests at stake. Mm-hmm. And we want this to end. I have long said, I want to put this one to bed to then get on to something much more, you know, simple as cancer research or being the first, you know, the manned mission to Mars, that type of thing. Right. Because the solution to the UFO phenomena should not have taken us 73 years. I mean, we're actually dealing with an actual phenomenon, or we've had 73 years of people hallucinating, even handling wreckage and remains from a crash. But we know that's not the case. So here now, collectively, we need to work with our elected officials. We need to continue the pressure. And I agree. If we don't succeed this time, then much of it will be our fault. And we will also be then responsible. And I think with James Fox's film and the History Channel continue to work on this, are continuing as far as to work on Roswell, the Grant, working with Stanton Friedman's archives and coming up with new Roswell leads that we can follow up on. Marco Rubio's committee and that report, and then the Navy, because they have to continue releasing more information, because if it was to entice the Air Force to come clean, no, I'm sorry, the Air Force, they could care less, because they wrote the book on this cover-up. They were the ones who initiated the cover-up. They were the ones who created the ridicule factor on the subject. That could be documented. And the idea that after now over 70 years, they have a chapter in their handbook. Well, today is when we're going to pull open the curtain behind the wizard, and it's all going to come, forward. No. The Navy has this opportunity, and let's help them, grease the skids, and hopefully, we'll all be there at the finish line when it comes out.
Yeah.
I like to close and at least add one caveat. And that was the former director of the CIA, Allen Dulles, who was a contemptible, corrupt individual. Allen Dulles was the one who made the comment that whenever he and all of his officials at the CIA would meet together in one room, that they were confident that Satan, the devil, also was sitting in the same room. So it's really quite contemptible when you think about it. But he was the one who made the comment, and I'll quote him. Quote, "If you want to keep a secret, then pretend to share it." So they're the masters at this. So we also need to be prepared that even though it appears they may be, for the first time, as far as at a military level, preparing to disclose, it may be just to nail down the lid even harder. And we walk away once again with nothing. We also need to be prepared for that.
Yep, I think it's one of those hope for the best, prepare for the worst scenarios. And, in preparing for the worst, you can see how there could be another 70-year battle ahead of us.
Oh, God.
So I know, it's sad. They'll give us Roswell, and then we'll have to fight 70 years for maybe Rendlesham or Nimitz.
I don't know if I'll still have the energy after 70 more years.
You'll pick who you're going to pass your torch to now. Start grooming them for the battle to come.
No, I want it to be now. I want it to be tomorrow. I want it to be next month, next year.
Well,
and,
we did just celebrate 100 years since the suffragette movement, and that was also a long fought battle that didn't just end or didn't just happen overnight either. So I think it's a test of our fortitude and our stamina for answers and
our passion
in the field.
Our passion, because if we are as convinced as we say we are, then we need to finish it. I have numerous colleagues that as they get older, they become more skeptical. And I remind them, I want to say to them, it's not, to me, it's not a failure of the phenomenon. It's your failure. Just because you haven't been able to solve it, just because you haven't been able to come up with a resolution, doesn't mean the phenomenon is any less. You're just getting more, as far as cynical, more skeptical, because you no longer have the passion. Dr. Hynek used to always tell us, never use that little boy wonderment. And I want to assure your audience that that little boy wonderment is in me as strong as ever. And I, for one, intend to finish this. And I thank everyone for the opportunity tonight. I certainly thank Grant, and I certainly thank Nicole for being here through the extent of all this, for asking a great number of wonderful questions that I'm not asked as far as otherwise. And I certainly look forward to doing this again in the future as soon as possible.
We'll keep pushing the envelope for sure, keep having these types of discussions, and it will move the needle forward, and it will keep it at the forefront. And I'd like to thank you as well for joining us here tonight, and I'll thank you on behalf of Grant as well.
He's still trying to find that button he was looking for.
Well, I did see it flash that the connection got a little low there for a second, so maybe he got booted out, but it's all right. We handled it from here. But I'll talk to you soon about having you back, and maybe you'd like to join in on one of our panel discussions where we have, 10 people at once. They're always great. So
count me in. Count me in.
Thank you, Don, and you have a great weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Talk soon. Good night.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.